Ever wondered how a king could die from eating too many eels? Or how a man literally laughed himself to death? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome to a journey through history's most impressively stupid, bizarre, and sleep-worthy demises. Here on Sleepy Stories Gone Wrong, we believe bedtime stories should be ridiculous, unnecessarily detailed, and just soothing enough to make your brain slowly shut down from second-hand embarrassment. So tonight, we're exploring some of the most awkward, absurd, and wildly unnecessary deaths in history. These aren't heroic tales, no brave last stands or tragic love stories here. Just a parade of humans, some rich, some royal, some just terribly unlucky, meeting their end in ways so bizarre they could only be real. Because apparently, history is full of people who said, "Hold my mead," and then immediately died. So grab your blanket, turn the lights down, and prepare your soul for secondhand cringe. These are the real, ridiculous ways people manage to absolutely botch their final moments. And hey, before you drift off into dreams of being crushed by a falling tortoise, yes, that happened too, don't forget to follow Sleepy Stories Gone Wrong. One click helps the channel grow and guarantees more historical nonsense to lull you into oblivion. The War of the Bucket Modena and Bologna, two Italian cities that weren't exactly sending each other Christmas cards back in the 14th century. And when medieval Italian cities didn't get along, it wasn't just some passive-aggressive tension. It was full-on family feud, but with catapults kind of drama. In 1325, soldiers from Modena invaded Bologna and stole a bucket. Yep, a wooden bucket that was attached to a well. No one really knows why. Maybe it was a nice bucket. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was just Tuesday. But Bologna was outraged. Like, give us our bucket back or face war level of outraged. And guess what? War it was. Bologna declared war on Modena over that bucket. They mobilized troops, drew up strategies, gave fiery speeches, all for an object that, as far as we know, wasn't magical, sacred, or even Wi-Fi enabled. It was just a bucket. The main battle was the Battle of Zappolino. Modena won, and not only did they win, they kept the bucket as a trophy. Today, it's proudly displayed in a tower like it's the Ark of the Covenant. Locals swear it's the original. And honestly, I hope it is. After all that chaos, it'd be tragic if it turned out to be just a replica. The best part? The war got an official name. The War of the Bucket. It sounds like a Monty Python skit. Imagine being a history teacher trying to say that with a straight face. Today, we'll learn about the Battle of Zappolino, which happened because of a bucket. Impossible to stay serious, and you know that old saying, "No war is ever fought in vain." Yeah, this one might have been. But at least it taught us a valuable lesson. If someone steals your bucket, maybe just buy a new one before you start arming a militia. Or don't. Maybe your bucket deserves a museum, too. The Great Emu War. When birds said no Australia. 1932. A country known for its terrifying spiders, upside-down seasons, and apparently military operations against birds. Yes, this is real. The Australian Army once went to war against emus. Giant, flightless birds. And they lost. It all started when ex-soldiers turned farmers in Western Australia were struggling with crop destruction, not from drought, not from pests, but from literal flocks of emus crashing through their fields like feathery tanks. Thousands of them, marching in like they owned the place. Because honestly, they kind of did. Farmers were desperate. So they called the government. The government called the military. The military brought machine guns. It all escalated very quickly. What followed was one of the most embarrassingly one-sided wars in history. And not in the humans' favor. They tried ambushing the birds, but emus, as it turns out, are surprisingly agile. Like dodge bullets and vanish into bushes, agile. The soldiers couldn't hit them. Guns jammed, birds scattered. One commander said, if they had a military division like the emus, they'd never lose a war again. After several failed attempts and a lot of wasted bullets, the government quietly pulled out. The emus, still undefeated. Farmers, still annoyed. Historians, still laughing. It became known as the Great Emu War, because of course it did. It's hard to top a story where the National Army loses to oversized chickens. Imagine explaining that at a military academy. Our next lecture, Strategies That Don't Work. Case study, the emu incident. So yes, in The Great Human Bird, standoff of 1932, the birds won. No medals were awarded, no songs were written. Just a lot of confused soldiers, smug emus, and one of the weirdest footnotes in military history. Lesson learned? Never underestimate nature, especially when it has strong legs and zero respect for authority. The Cadaver Synod, when a pope put a corpse on trial. Let's set the scene. Rome, 897 AD. Political tensions are high. The church is in chaos, and Pope Stephen VI is having a week. So what does he decide to do to deal with his problems? Put a dead guy on trial. Yes, a full-blown trial, with lawyers. And the defendant? A rotting corpse. The unlucky posthumous defendant was Pope Formosus, who had died months earlier. But Stephen really hated him. Like, dig him up and sit him in court level of hatred. So that's what he did. They exhumed the body, dressed it in papal robes, and propped it up on a throne like some sort of macabre puppet show. Formosus didn't say much, being dead and all, so they assigned him a deacon to answer questions on his behalf. This was less a fair trial and more a theater of the absurd. Charges included serving as bishop while alive and being ambitious, which, let's be honest, is basically the job description of half of Rome at the time. Unsurprisingly, the corpse was found guilty. His papacy was invalidated, his robes ripped off, and his blessing fingers cut off. Yes, specifically those fingers. Then his body was thrown into the Tiber River. Because why not end things with a splash? But karma's real, even in medieval politics. Pope Stephen was arrested shortly after. Some say he was strangled in prison. Others say the ghost of Formosus came back for revenge. Either way, justice, sort of, was served. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the strangest chapters in church history. It's hard to beat the visual of a pope screaming at a corpse in full regalia. Somewhere, Monty Python is kicking themselves for not thinking of it first. Moral of the story? Even after death, paperwork can still find you. And maybe, just maybe, don't start a feud with someone who might haunt you from the grave. The dancing plague. When people literally dance themselves to death, picture this. It's July 1518 in Strasbourg, and a woman steps into the street and starts dancing. No music, no festival, just vibes. And she doesn't stop. For hours, then days. Then, suddenly, dozens of others join her. Welcome to one of the weirdest medical mysteries ever, the dancing plague. In less than a week, over 30 people were dancing non-stop in the sweltering summer heat. By the end of the month, that number jumped to 400. They weren't just having a good time. They were collapsing from exhaustion, some literally dancing to their deaths. And doctors? Their diagnosis? Too much hot blood. Yeah, thanks, medieval science. So what did the authorities do? Naturally, they built more dance floors. Seriously. They thought the best cure was to let people dance it out. Musicians were hired. Stages were built. It was like Coachella. If Coachella were a terrifying, sweaty, accidental death trap. No one really knows what caused it. Some say mass hysteria, a sort of collective stress breakdown. Others blame poisoned rye bread, laced with ergot, a fungus that can cause hallucinations, which means this might have been history's worst rave with the worst snacks. Eventually, the plague faded as mysteriously as it began. People stopped dancing, the stages were torn down, and life went back to normal-ish. But the legend lived on. And so did the town's reputation as the place where even your cardio routine could kill you. Imagine explaining this to someone today. Yeah, my great-great-great-grandma died from too much twerking in 1518. Doesn't quite make it onto a family crest, does it? Lesson learned. If your body suddenly demands a non-stop dance party, maybe check your bread before blaming your blood. Sigurd the Mighty, killed by a decapitated head Vikings, were known for being fierce, fearless, and, occasionally, victims of poetic irony. Take Sigurd the Mighty, a 9th century Norse Earl of Orkney. He lived by the sword, conquered lands, and inspired fear in his enemies. But his story ends in a way that would make even the Grim Reaper do a double-take. After a victorious battle, Sigurd beheaded his enemy, Maelbrigte, a Scottish noble with an unfortunate taste for war and bushy mustaches. As a trophy, Sigurd tied the severed head to his saddle. Yes, you read that right. He literally strapped his enemy's face next to his thigh and went for a ride. That's not a flex, that's a red flag. Now, you'd think the guy who won the Averdabber Sahab battle would be the one telling the story. But nope. As Sigurd rode off, the head's teeth, yep, those same teeth, scraped against his leg. Over and over. Enough to break the skin. And since medieval hygiene was about as advanced as a rock, the wound got infected. You know where this is going, right? Sigurd the Mighty died from a leg wound caused by the mouth of a man he'd already killed. It's possibly history's first and only case of posthumous biting revenge. Somewhere, Maelbrigte's ghost was probably laughing his spectral butt off. This kind of death would be rejected in a TV script for being too unrealistic. Like, hey boss, what if the villain is killed by his own victory souvenir? The producer would have thrown you out of the writer's room, but this is real life. And in real life, even being a badass Viking warlord doesn't protect you from the threat of vengeful dental work. Hans Steininger, the man who tripped on his own beard. You know you've made it in life when your beard becomes a local legend. Hans Steininger, the mayor of Braunau am Inn in 16th century Austria, had a beard so long it could probably qualify for its own passport. The thing was over 4.5 feet long. That's not facial hair anymore. That's a health hazard. Now, Hans wasn't careless. He usually kept his majestic beard rolled up and tucked into a little leather pouch. Because, you know, safety first. But one fateful day, a fire broke out in the town. And in the chaos, Hans forgot to secure his furry legacy. Panic in the streets. People running, screaming, probably looting cheese. And there goes Hans, rushing down the stairs like the responsible leader he was. But then, the beard struck. It unraveled, tangled around his feet, and tripped him mid-heroic dash. He fell. He broke his neck. And just like that, the man with the world's most luxurious chin scarf was gone. Not in battle. Not from illness, but by beard betrayal. It's the kind of plot twist even Shakespeare would have thought was a bit much. The town was so moved and possibly embarrassed by the whole thing that they preserved the beard. You can still see it today in a museum, just chilling in a glass case like a fuzzy warning sign. Let this be a lesson in grooming safety. So yes, Hans Steininger, local hero, died because of an epic trip. Literally, let this story comfort you. No matter how badly your day goes, at least you didn't get taken out by your own facial hair. Crowned and crushed. The death of King Charles VIII of France. King Charles VIII of France had big dreams. He wanted to conquer Naples, reform the kingdom, and possibly, just possibly, not die in a way that sounded like a tragic slapstick routine. Unfortunately, life and architecture had other plans. In 1498, Charles was enjoying a pleasant day at the Château d'Amboise. He had just finished watching a friendly game of jeu de paume, a kind of medieval tennis where the main hazard wasn't losing, but accidentally becoming history's weirdest obituary. As he left the match, Charles was walking through a low doorway, a very low doorway. And instead of ducking like a sensible monarch, he strode forward like the ceiling owed him something. Crack. His head smacked straight into the stone lintel. At first, it seemed like just a bump. You know, classic royal embarrassment. Ha 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 ha! Remember that time the king lost a tennis match to a wall? But then the headache started, and the nausea, and then the death. Turns out, hitting your skull on 15th century architecture is not a minor inconvenience. It's a full-blown medical emergency, especially when your kingdom's top doctor probably believed in leeches and prayer. Just like that, King Charles VIII exited stage left. Not in battle, not from poison, but by headbutting a doorway like it, was his mortal enemy. It's one of those deaths that make you pause and wonder, How is this not a cartoon? But nope, it's in the history books. And now, every time you accidentally hit your head on a cabinet, just remember, you're in royal company. The emperor who laughed himself to death. Elagabalus would approve. Let's travel back to ancient Greece, where intellectuals debated philosophy, democracy flourished, and people apparently laughed themselves straight into the afterlife. Enter Zeuxis, a famed Greek painter of the 5th century BCE, known for creating art so realistic, birds supposedly tried to peck the grapes he painted. That's talent. But what truly immortalized him wasn't his brushwork. It was how he died. Legend has it that Zeuxis was commissioned to paint a portrait of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. The client? An old woman, and she wanted herself portrayed as Aphrodite. Bold choice. Zeuxis, ever the professional, complied. But as he unveiled the painting, he found it so hilariously absurd that he burst into uncontrollable laughter and died on the spot. Yes, his final act was laughing at his own work. It's the ancient Greek version of a stand-up comedian getting killed by his own punchline. Literally. Modern historians argue the story might be exaggerated or even apocryphal. But hey, if you're going to die anyway, doing it while laughing at your own joke feels like a power move. To be fair, this was ancient Greece. People believed in gods with petty drama and centaurs. So dying from laughter? Honestly, not even top 5 weirdest things to happen that week. The king who died from holding it in. Let it go. Man King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, 18th century. A monarch remembered less for his political achievements and more for proving that too much of a good thing can absolutely kill you. It was Shrove Tuesday in 1771, a day of indulgence before Lent. The king sat down for a grand meal, and by grand, we mean absurd. He devoured lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, herring, and champagne. But the real star? His favorite dessert, semla, a sweet roll filled with almond paste and topped with whipped cream, served in a bowl of hot milk. He didn't eat one, he ate 14. 14 creamy, bready sugar bombs. Was this gluttony or commitment to the bit? Historians are still debating. That night, the king reportedly died of digestive problems, specifically a fatal case of death by dessert. Some say it was indigestion. Others suggest a stroke brought on by overindulgence. Either way, the man went out full. And what a legacy! Imagine being remembered as the king who ate himself to death. It's the kind of royal biography that writes itself. He ruled a nation. He conquered desserts. He lost the war against portion control. Modern science may frown on his diet, but you can't deny the drama. A monarch's final battle, fought in his stomach. No swords, no armies, just cream, carbs, and hubris. Moral of the story? Maybe stop at the 10th pastry. Or don't. Just make sure your throne is close to a bathroom, the emperor who crowned himself. Because who needs friends? Napoleon Bonaparte. You know the guy. Short, loud, French, and allergic to humility. In 1804, he decided to take this whole self-made man thing to an entirely new level. He was going to be emperor. And not just any emperor, the emperor, with maximum drama. The stage, Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris. The guest list, Europe's finest aristocrats, generals, and a very confused Pope Pius VII. Yes, the Pope came all the way from Rome, probably expecting to do the honors, place the crown, sprinkle the holy water, and call it a day. But Napoleon had other plans. As the moment approached, the Pope raised his hands, ready to crown the new emperor. And then Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. Just like that. No ceremony, no divine approval. Just, "I got this, thanks." The crowd gasped. The Pope blinked, probably considered retiring on the spot. And Napoleon? He just stood there, crowned and smug, like a kid who brought his own trophy to a sports event. What message was he sending? That his power didn't come from the church or tradition. It came from him. From ambition, ego, and an unshakable belief that he could out-Napoleon anyone in the room. It worked, of course. He ruled for a while, started a bunch of wars, changed Europe forever. But let's be honest, this moment, this was peak Napoleon. The "I crown myself" energy is unmatched. Iconic, unhinged, and somehow very on brand. So next time someone tries to steal your spotlight, remember Napoleon. And if you're feeling bold, crown yourself. Just maybe not in front of the Pope. The Dancing Plague. When the beat dropped and no one could stop, it was 1518 in Strasbourg, a perfectly average day, until Frau Trophäa walked into the street and started dancing. Nothing unusual at first. Maybe she liked the fresh air. Maybe the vibes were just right. But then she didn't stop. For hours, then overnight, then for days, and then more people joined in. Within a week, over 30 people were dancing non-stop. No music, no festival, just frantic, involuntary boogieing. Historians call it the Dancing Plague of 1518. But honestly, it feels more like history's first rave with no DJ and zero chill. City officials were baffled. Doctors said it was hot blood. Clergy said it was a curse. One solution? More dancing. Seriously, they built a stage and hired a band. Because if people were going to collapse from exhaustion, at least they'd do it to a banger. Some dancers reportedly died. Heart attacks, strokes, pure exhaustion. The plague lasted for weeks. The final death toll is fuzzy, kind of like the whole event. No one's totally sure why it happened. Ergot poisoning? Mass hysteria? Some demon with killer dance moves? Modern. Scholars still argue about it. But let's be real. No theory explains the raw weirdness. A plague where your body starts vibing uncontrollably until it gives out? It's the historical equivalent of dance like nobody's watching, taken way too far. And imagine being the one guy who can't dance, just trying to buy bread while the entire town breaks into a collective interpretive seizure next to the bakery. So next time you feel awkward at a party, just remember, at least you're not literally dancing until you drop, because 500 years ago, people actually did. Tycho Brahe, death by bladder explosion, probably. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer, born in 1546, who spent most of his life measuring stars, planets, and his own bladder capacity, apparently. He was brilliant, eccentric, and wore a brass prosthetic nose because he lost the original one in a duel over math. You know, as one does. But Tycho's death, that's where things get weird. According to one version, he was at a royal banquet, sipping wine and holding it in like a polite nobleman. Back then, getting up during dinner was considered super rude, like you just started a war rude. So Tycho, ever the gentleman, didn't excuse himself to pee. He waited, and waited, and waited some more, until finally his bladder said, "Nope, I'm done," and allegedly burst. Yep, exploded, like a water balloon of tragedy. He died days later, supposedly from internal injuries due to not peeing in time. Modern science thinks it was probably a bladder infection or kidney failure. But honestly, death by bladder explosion is just too absurdly poetic to ignore. It's like the universe punishing you for being too polite. Speak now, or forever hold your urine. And this was a man who mapped the heavens with pre-telescope precision, who threw legendary parties with a court jester dwarf and a tame elk that got drunk and fell down the stairs? Yes, really. That's not even exaggerated. His elk partied harder than most of us. Tycho's death became a kind of medieval moral tale. Don't duel over math. Don't glue metal to your face. And for the love of all things holy, go to the bathroom when you need to. Dignity is important, but exploding is a bit excessive. So next time you feel awkward excusing yourself during a meeting, just remember, Tycho Brahe didn't, and he paid the ultimate price. Sigurd the Mighty. Death by Deadhead Sigurd. Eysteinsson, better known as Sigurd the Mighty, was a 9th century Viking Earl of Orkney. He was strong, feared, and had a beard that probably smelled like salt, blood, and glory. A true Norse warrior. But his death? Oh boy, his death was not quite so mighty. During one of his glorious rampages, Sigurd challenged a rival chieftain named Mael-Brigte to battle. Sigurd, being the modest Viking he was, decided to cheat just a tiny bit by bringing 80 men to a one-on-one duel. Mael-Brigte and his men were all killed. Classic Viking move. Fair fight? Not so much. Wanting a souvenir, Sigurd tied Mael-Brigte's severed head to his saddle. Yes, his saddle. Because helmets are for protection, but trophies are for style, points. He rode back, probably feeling quite pleased with himself, head flopping around like a grim bobblehead. Here's where karma shows up like a drunk uncle at a wedding. As Sigurd galloped along, one of Mael-Brigte's teeth, yes, a tooth, scratched Sigurd's leg. A small cut, barely worth noticing, except it got infected. Badly. This was the 800s. No antibiotics, no neosporin, no urgent care. Just herbs and prayers. The wound worsened, turned septic, and Sigurd, the mighty Viking who conquered men and lands, died because of a bite from a head he had already killed. It's poetic justice, wrapped in absurdity. Like history yelling, "That's what you get for bringing 80 dudes to a solo fight and then accessorizing with a corpse." To this day, Sigurd holds the prestigious honor of being one of the only known people in history to be killed by a dead man, which is honestly kind of impressive. So let that be a lesson. If you win a fight, maybe skip the corpse jewelry. You never know when dental revenge will strike. The dancing plague, when people literally danced themselves to death. In the summer of 1518, the good people of Strasbourg, in modern-day France, found themselves in the middle of an epidemic, not of plague or famine, but of dancing. Yes, uncontrollable, non-stop, soul-devouring dancing. Basically, a cursed Renaissance rave. It all began with one woman named Frau Trophäa. One day she walked out into the street and started dancing, alone. No music, no audience, just full commitment to the groove. People thought, okay, maybe she's just eccentric. But she kept going, for days. Then others joined. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Doctors were baffled. Priests were praying. And the dancers? Still going, sweating, convulsing, collapsing, and getting right back up again like medieval Zumba zombies. Some danced until their feet bled. Others collapsed from exhaustion. A few actually died from heart attacks and strokes. Imagine explaining to your family that your cousin Johann died doing the worm in the middle of the street because he couldn't stop. Local authorities did what any rational 16th century officials would do. They built a stage and hired a live band. Yep. Their solution to people can't stop dancing and are dying was more dancing. Because medieval logic is undefeated. Historians still don't fully understand what caused the dancing mania. Was it mass hysteria? Ergot poisoning from moldy bread? A psychological escape from the soul-crushing despair of the era? Who knows? But it definitely makes you rethink those all-night dance parties. So the next time you say, I danced till I dropped, just remember, some people in 1518 literally did. And no, there was never a Strasbourg shuffle TikTok trend, but if there had been, you know it would have gone viral. Moral of the story? If someone starts dancing alone in public, maybe don't join in right away. Tycho Brahe, the key, man who refused to pee and paid the ultimate price. Let's talk about Tycho Brahe, famous Danish astronomer, genius of the stars, and victim of the pettiest bladder in scientific history. Tycho helped map the heavens, but he couldn't outsmart one simple rule of biology. When you gotta go, you gotta go. The story goes like this. In 1601, Tycho was at a royal banquet. Fancy food, nobility, flowing drinks, the works. But in those days, it was considered extremely rude to leave the table during a meal, even if nature called. And Tycho, ever the gentleman, or perhaps ever the people-pleaser, decided to hold it in. He held it in for hours, all while sipping wine and chatting about comets. Eventually, his bladder basically threw in the towel. Medical reports say it either burst or became so infected that it led to his death 11 excruciating days later. All because he didn't want to interrupt dinner to pee. Now, Tycho wasn't just any guy. He had a pet moose, which died falling down the stairs drunk, a metal nose after losing the real one in a duel, and a legendary mustache. The man lived like a Renaissance rock star, but his downfall? Bladder shyness. Some say he whispered his final words were, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." which sounds deep until you realize he might have just meant, "Please tell people I didn't die from holding my pee." Modern scholars suggest that maybe it wasn't just the pee. Maybe it was a urinary tract infection. Maybe his kidneys were already failing. But let's be real. If the headline reads, "Scientist dies because he refused to pee," the details kind of write themselves. So next time you're at a dinner party, deep in conversation, and you feel that bladder twinge, think of Tycho and go to the bathroom. He literally died so you don't have to. Sigurd the Mighty, killed by a dead man's tootha. The mighty Viking Earl Sigurd Eysteinsson, warrior, conqueror, absolute legend, and the proud owner of perhaps the most ironically stupid death in Viking history, which, let's be honest, is saying a lot. Sigurd had just defeated a local Scottish noble named Niall Braichi, and because he was feeling extra dramatic, he decided to strap his enemy's severed head to his horse's saddle like a gruesome trophy. You know, as one does when you're a Viking trying to send a message and don't have access to Instagram stories. Now, as Sigurd rode home, the head was bouncing around. It wasn't a cute Pinterest aesthetic. It was a rotting, toothy mess flopping against the horse's flank. And here's where things took a turn. One of Niall Braichi's teeth, yep, a single tooth, scraped against Sigurd's leg. Just a little nick, a minor scratch. Nothing serious, except it got infected. Fast. Within days, the great Sigurd, Earl of Orkney, was dead. Cause of death, dental revenge. It's almost poetic. He decapitated a man, rode off in victory, and was then taken down by a piece of that man's face. Makes you wonder if that was Niall Braichi's final plan. You may take my head, but I'm taking your immune system with me. Historians believe the infection spread rapidly, and since this was the 9th century, the best treatment available was probably hope really hard. Spoiler. That didn't work. Sigurd became the first Earl of Orkney, and also the first man in recorded history to lose a posthumous duel with a tooth. His legacy lives on, not just in Viking lore, but in every dentist's cautionary tale about underestimating plaque. So, remember, karma can come back to bite you. Sometimes, literally. Even if the person it's coming from doesn't technically have a pulse anymore. The dancing plague, when people literally danced themselves to death. Yes, the year was 1518 in Strasbourg. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and suddenly, people just started dancing. Not at a festival, not at a wedding, just in the street, for no reason, with no music, and they couldn't stop. It began with one woman, Frau Trophea, who decided to bust a move out of nowhere. She danced for hours, then days, then a week. People watched in horror, or maybe confusion. Was it a performance? A statement? Cardio? No one knew. Soon, dozens joined her, then hundreds. They couldn't control their bodies. It wasn't a flash mob. It was a full-on historical glitch. People collapsed from exhaustion, broke bones, and, yes, some actually died. From dancing. Take that, Zumba. Doctors were called, of course. Their expert medieval opinion? Too much hot blood. Their prescription? More dancing. Seriously, they set up stages and hired musicians to help the dancers. dance more. Because, obviously, spoiler alert, that didn't help. It's hard to moonwalk your way out of a medical emergency. The plague finally ended as mysteriously as it began, after about a month. No one really knows what caused it. Mass hysteria? Ergot poisoning? A shared hatred of silence? Some historians believe it was stress-induced. Basically, a collective medieval mental breakdown. Others think it was a religious mania, or maybe a fungal infection that made your brain go disco. Because why not? To this day, the dancing plague remains one of the weirdest mass events in history. It's like the Middle Ages tried to invent a rave, but forgot the consent part, or water breaks, or basic human limits. So next time someone says, they danced until they dropped, just remember, in 1518, people actually did. And they didn't even get a TikTok out of it. Sigurd the Mighty, killed by a dead man's tooth. Let's talk about Sigurd the Mighty. Viking Earl of Orkney. Warrior. Conqueror. Absolute badass. Until he lost a fight. To a corpse. Sigurd had a solid career in the 9th century. Raiding, pillaging, standard Viking stuff. One day, he challenged a local chieftain named Mael Bricti to battle. The terms were clear: 40 men each. Honor. Tradition. Very dramatic. Except Sigurd showed up with 80 men. Because, honor is flexible when you're trying to win. He easily overwhelmed Mael Bricti and his outnumbered crew. Classic Viking move. Sigurd even tied his enemy's severed head to his saddle like a trophy. Hardcore, right? Well, not for long. As Sigurd rode away, victorious, and probably composing his next saga, Mael Bricti's head started bouncing against his leg. That would have been mildly gross, if not for one tiny detail. The dead guy had a sharp tooth, and it scratched Sigurd's leg. Tiny scratch. No big deal, right? Except this was the 800s, and antibiotics hadn't been invented. So, that small tooth wound got infected. Badly. And guess what? Sigurd died. Yep. The great Viking warlord met his end because he got bitten by a dead man's head. You really can't make this up. It's like the universe said, "Congrats on the win, champ. Here's a tetanus shot from the afterlife." It's poetic, in a deeply ironic, slightly disgusting way. So, what's the lesson here? Don't cheat in battle. Don't mock your enemies. Don't use severed heads as fashion accessories. Maybe all of the above. But mostly, it's this. If you're going to ride with a corpse, maybe wear shin guards. The dancing plague. When people danced themselves to death, imagine this. It's the summer of 1518 in Strasbourg, modern-day France. Suddenly, hundreds of people start dancing, and they can't stop. Like, literally, can't stop. It began with one woman, Frau Trophea, who started dancing in the streets. Hours passed, days passed, no music, no party, just relentless, uncontrollable dancing. Then others joined her. Soon, dozens. Then, hundreds. It wasn't a joyful celebration. These people danced until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some even died from heart attacks or strokes. Doctors were baffled. They prescribed more dancing as a cure, which, spoiler alert, made things worse. Historians still debate what caused this bizarre event. Some say it was mass hysteria, a psychological reaction to the stress and hardships of the time. Others suspect ergot poisoning from moldy rye bread, which can cause hallucinations and convulsions. Whatever the cause, the dancing plague is a haunting reminder that history isn't always tidy. Sometimes it's just weird. And sometimes people literally dance themselves to death. So next time you feel like dancing nonstop, maybe take a break, just in case.